Catastrophes happen all the time. We've seen them all the way through Genesis already. Today we're going to see another one, the Tower of Babel, where everyone is scattered all over the earth, and suddenly they couldn't understand one another's language. In one moment, everything changed. Today we're going to see how God uses catastrophes even for good. Good morning. Welcome to our Women's Bible Study. We are super glad you're joining us today. We are working our way through a series in the book of Genesis. Now, last week we talked about the Table of Nations, and we pointed that to the end times, which was super fun for me because that's my favorite thing to talk about. So now what I want to do is I want to move back and show you back to the beginning in Genesis, and then towards the end we'll kind of move back to the end a little more, and we're just going to flip-flop between the two today. So where we are at this point is Noah and his sons have actually stepped off the ark, and we know that. I know we talked about this before. The ark was on most likely Mount Ararat, which is our modern-day Turkey. Most people believe that the Garden of Eden is in our modern-day Iraq. So you can see it's this whole Middle Eastern. So Noah, I gave you a really small map for that. Noah probably lived out his days in this particular area between, the Tigris and the Euphrates River there up into Turkey, that whole area. So the Middle East has roots all the way back to Genesis, even with Adam and Eve and then with Noah. So where we are today is at this particular point, everyone has been scattering and moving to different places, but here's what was going on. The whole earth had one language and one speech. Everyone spoke the same language. And I think how easy that would be nowadays if, in fact, we could still go back to doing that. Because it's hard to go to another country and not be able to understand a word they're saying. Before they came out with Google Translate, we actually went to Italy once and I tried to order a mushroom pizza. Okay, tried explaining a mushroom. I'm like, a mushroom. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. No, it's a mushroom pizza. Why don't you understand that? Okay. And it's so incredibly frustrating because we couldn't understand each other. And that's, before this event today, everyone was on the same page. I always think how easy it would be for Bible translators if, there probably wouldn't even be a job, if there was no Bible translation that needed to be. I used this illustration a while back. When missionaries were in northern Alaska, the Eskimos lived there. They were trying to get the Bible translated so that they could understand the Bible in the way they spoke. And they were having difficulty trying to explain how to translate the word joy. There was no word in the Eskimos' language for joy. And so what they did is they just hung around and waited to see when the happiest, part of the day was, and they realized that the most joyful that they saw anyone was when the Eskimos fed their sled dogs. And when they fed them, the dogs were excited, and they wagged their tails and they wagged their tails. So they found their word for joy. So in their Bible, it would say, wag your tail, and again I say, wag your tail, okay? Because that's how they would have to translate it to where they could understand it. But life would have been so much simpler if this whole Tower of Babel that we're going to talk about today never even happened. So let's look at what's going on. Verse 2 says this: It came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now, Shinar is in Babylon, which is our modern-day Iraq. I always like to give you maps so you can kind of see where everything is. You see little baby Israel over there, and then as you go farther, you can see up top is Syria, and then to the right of that is Iraq. So this is where all of this was going on at this particular time. So God tells them to scatter, but of course Nimrod, we talked a little bit about him last week, he has this idea he doesn't really want to scatter. So he wants to come up with his own plan. He wants to just keep everyone together in one particular area. So we see this here. So then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and whose top is in the heavens, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. In essence, it's kind of like what's going on today. I want to make a name for myself. I don't want this to be about God. I don't want any of my life to be about God. We're going to build something. We're going to build a business. We're going to build a whatever we want to build that builds us up, and it makes God not even a part of our life. And that's exactly what they were doing. They're like, let's build a tower. Let's build a city to ourselves. We don't want God involved in this whole thing. And so what they were doing was in complete defiance of what God told them to do. But here's what I want to tell you. This is what we learn about God, and this will change your life when you really, really honestly get this. God can override what man does anytime he wants to. Like, God is that big that he can override anything he wants to. And that's important because I don't worry about things like I used to, because I know that. I know that if God doesn't want something, he's going to make sure it doesn't happen. Like, he's that big. A famous Augustinian monk, Thomas à Kempis, in the 1400s said this: man proposes, but God disposes. That's just the way it works. Proverbs 19:21 says this: many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. Like, you and I can have a ton of plans in our hearts to do things, but at any point, God can overrule our plans because his purpose is bigger than anything we want to do. Now, the greatest part about this in Genesis is that these people had their own personal plan in Shinar to build this city for themselves. And I think it's funny, God's like, oh yeah, not going to happen. That's a really cute thought, but nope, sorry, that's no way. In our discipleship group on Wednesdays, we have to memorize a verse. And this is the verse that I actually memorized because it's so fascinating to me. Right here, Psalm 2:1. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The one enthroned in heaven laughs. Okay, the Lord scoffs at them. And when I read that, and I memorize that because that was so important to be a reminder that nothing happens on this earth without God having something to do with it, and he can override it anytime he wants to. Now, I was thinking about this with the 2020 election. Now, for those of you watching, do not email me. I don't care who you voted for. You don't care who I voted for. It doesn't matter. This is not about the election. This is about how God is so big that anytime he can overrule anything. And that might have just happened in the election. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. So what I'm saying next is an illustration. I'm not saying that this is what happened, so please don't send me hate mail. But I just want this to be a reminder that God rules over everything, even elections. So last week, after we did the whole end times thing and all the names, I know that the end times, the center will be the Middle East, with Israel, of course, being the epicenter. And we talked about this last week, about this coalition of nations that will come against little baby Israel. All the black in there is Muslim majority nations that they're going to come against Israel. So I was thinking about that when I was doing this lesson. And I thought, here's a scenario. I will repeat. I'm not saying this happened. I'm saying that this could have happened. I don't know if it did or not. Let's say that the election was actually truly fraudulent. Don't know it was, just not saying that. But let's just say that Trump really did win. Okay, but Biden's our president, and that's fine. But maybe the election was never even about the United States. Maybe it was never even about the election here and having anything to do with the United States at all. Maybe it's about that. Maybe it's all about something that God is doing in the Middle East. Maybe it was about Afghanistan. Because if you really think that through, Afghanistan needs to fall to be part of that whole thing. The United States needs to be out of it. And I don't think Trump would have ever let happen to Afghanistan what actually happened. So maybe in God's overarching plan, maybe he just needed a president in there who would be like, yeah, let Afghanistan fall, whatever. And maybe that's what happened. I don't know. Maybe God blinded the eyes of people. Maybe fraud happened, and like I've been voting for I can't tell you how many years. I've never seen anything like this before, ever. But maybe God just allowed weird things to happen in this election because he needed a president in the United States to do things that God needed to get done, not even here, but maybe it has something to do with the Middle East. Now, I don't know, that's just it's not even a theory, it's just a thought. And it's just a thought that God can overrule anything. Because I've never ever seen an election like this before. It's so weird. Now, we live in Arizona. Now, they just did this whole audit thing here, and it's so interesting because the audit wasn't to change the election. Arizona went for Biden, but pretty much there was an uproar because most people, there was a huge portion of people that were like, that would never happen on a normal day. So it was so weird that they decided that they wanted to make sure that there was no fraud. And so they brought in a group. The group was not here to tell us who really won. They weren't here to tell us. All they want to know is our election system, is there a problem? And we need to find out so we can correct it for the next time. Okay, so that's what the whole audit was for. So when it was all said and done, they had a specific day. It was on YouTube. You could have probably gone down to the Capitol to watch it. And the people that did the audit, they weren't even, like I said, it wasn't like they were Republicans trying to oust Biden. It was none of that. They really just wanted to see what was broken in our system. And so what they did is they proved and they showed people that over 15,000 people voted twice. And they showed you, here's John Doe's, and here's the same John Doe. Same address, same whatever, he voted twice. It got counted twice. That happened 15,000 times. Then they found over 20,000 people who voted that from addresses they didn't even live in. So if I moved, let's just say, and I had a ballot go to our old address, then they voted with my ballot, and this happened over 20,000 times. They literally proved that there were fake ballots. Okay, like they showed us, this was a real ballot, this was a fake one, and you could tell by the way it was printed or stamped or whatever. Now, all this is said and done, whatever. Like I said, I don't care. I'm just saying that my brother comes in from Arkansas a couple days later, and he goes, yeah, we just heard on the news that Biden really did win Arizona. And my sister and I are looking at each other like, did you watch the audit? And he's like, what audit? It's like it never even existed. Nobody even knows about it. It is the most weirdest thing. It's like everyone is blind around us. And I can't figure that out except that I know God rules. And I know he's doing something. And I don't know what it is. And like I said, maybe Biden did win. Maybe all those votes. So I contacted our representative who's in our area. And I must have emailed her twice because she literally, her office called me. And they said, Lisa, here's the deal. We don't know what's going on. Like, we're in the dark just like you are. We know that everything is now on the Attorney General's desk. He's supposed to do something with all this information. We're in the dark just like everyone else. We don't know. Now, all that to say, I don't care. My whole point was, we just want to know who won, like legitimately won. If it's Biden, great. If it's Trump, like they're not going to overturn it, but as a citizen of Arizona, I would kind of like to know that. But that's not even the point. The point is this, that God rules politically over everything on this earth. And the elections in the United States might have nothing to do with the United States at all, because God is doing something over there. And maybe, just maybe, the entire election was because we needed a president in who would let Afghanistan fall, because that's going to be part of that whole area over there. I don't know. That's welcome to my brain. Okay? Sometimes that's not a good thing, I don't think. But anyway, God is just that big. I was thinking about this with Jesus. I bet his followers felt the exact same way, like, what's going on? What just happened? Like, here's a guy who comes on the scene, who does nothing but good. He raises people from the dead. He heals people. He feeds people. He offers salvation for all eternity. And he's arrested. And then he's flogged. And then he's put up in front of a crowd like, here's Jesus, who did nothing wrong, and here is this evil guy, what is it, Barabbas? And they're like asking the crowd, who do you want us to crucify? Crucify Jesus! Let Barabbas go. And you're like, what? Like, why would anyone do that? That makes no sense whatsoever. Like, in a normal mind, like, why would you, kill the good guy? But that's what I'm saying. It's because God does things that don't make any sense to us, but here's what we know. God always has a plan. And we can stand on that. That's what's so, even when everything looks out of control, even when everything looks catastrophic, even like the Tower of Babel today. That's going to be catastrophic. But look at this. If we look at history, we see God moving in mighty ways in the midst of the weirdest catastrophes. He just does. Joel Richardson wrote a book here. It's called The Mystery of Catastrophe. And in the preface, he says this: at the heart of this book is a firm conviction that the Lord is always at work. In fact, it is specifically in the midst of catastrophe, crisis, times when it seems as though the Lord is most absent, that he's actually most active. He says, learning to see gospel opportunities when many others only see crisis is not a skill that comes naturally. Yet it is a skill that the body of Christ must learn. The closer we approach the time of Jesus' return, the more natural and man-made disasters and calamities we will see. And here's what we need to do. We need to learn to recognize God's hand in everything that goes on. Now, think about everything that we've seen in Genesis so far. We've seen the Garden of Eden, okay? We saw Adam and Eve were banished because they sinned. That's a catastrophe. Like, sin entered this world and ruined it from there all the way to the end of time. Like, that is one of the greatest catastrophes that ever happened. But that catastrophe opened our eyes to something really good. And that is this seed who would eventually come along that would crush Satan, who we know is Jesus. Through that catastrophe, we were given hope for something even better. We see it with Noah, a flood. That's a catastrophe when God wipes off every person on this earth except Noah and his family. But God uses that catastrophe to start over with a new group of people who will move throughout this earth. And because of that catastrophe, God will call one man, Abraham, to start a brand new nation as we know of Israel. And through his descendants would come the Messiah, Jesus. See, the death of Jesus probably looked like a catastrophe. But that catastrophe is what saves you and I as sinners. So we need to remember that whenever there's catastrophes that you see, we need to start looking at things differently with focus on God. Like, God, what are you doing in the midst of this particular scenario? So today we're going to see in Genesis this new catastrophe that God's going to confuse the language and everyone's going to scatter throughout the world. And that seems really, really devastating, but God always has a plan. We never, ever want to forget that. I started thinking, what if we could really grasp that? I mean, really honestly grasp that. What if we could look at fallen elections or fallen countries or painful divorces or the loss of a loved one or a broken heart or a cancer diagnosis, like true catastrophes in our own personal lives. But what if we could look at them with a completely different light? What if we could turn on the news and look at the news? Or what if we could look at the world or the wars or pain or suffering through the lens of the Bible and see that God uses catastrophes to further his story in the world? He just does. What if we could really grasp that amidst anything going on in our life, do you think that we would have more peace? And I'm going to say yes. Because I know that when catastrophes happen, we just had two things happen to us on Friday that Rob and I are looking at each other like, did that honestly just happen? Like, it just totally threw us for a loop. But there was so much peace because I'm just like, I don't know what God's doing. I'm not going to worry about it. He'll take care of us one way or the other. It just doesn't matter. So I was thinking, do you think we would face our trials differently, maybe even with joy, knowing that God rules over any and all catastrophes? I don't know, I think it's something that will change our life when we get that. So back to Genesis. The plan was for people to scatter. We saw this in Genesis 9:7. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. That was God's mandate to what's supposed to happen. But last week we met Nimrod. He, of course, had other plans. He didn't want people to scatter. He wanted them to stay in one place. He wanted them to build the city, the exact opposite of what God said. I wanted to show you a picture here. And I always show you maps because it's really important to see that the places that we talk about are actual places, like in the Bible, they're actual places today. So if you look at the top where it says Iraq, top purple right there, and then follow down just a little bit, you'll see Babylon, you'll see the Tower of Babel. So that's where all of this happened, right there in the Middle East. Now, I want to talk about Babylon, and I want to I want to talk about it in Genesis, and then I want to also bring in the end times really quick so you can see the correlation there. In the Bible, whenever it talks about Babylon, it's always pretty much an evil, wicked system. But Babylon represents an evil world system. It represents a system that wants nothing to do with God. Babylon always represents a false religion. So I want to show you how Babylon ends up in Revelation. Watch this. Revelation 17. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The title was written on her forehead, Mystery Babylon, the Great, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Now, people want to know, okay, that's amazing, but that's a place. Like, this is an actual literal place, Mystery Babylon. The Bible doesn't really tell us exactly who it is, but gives us a whole lot of ideas who it could possibly be. Joel Richardson wrote this book called Mystery Babylon. It's really fascinating. And he believes that Mystery Babylon is actually Saudi Arabia. And so I'm going to put some stuff up here, and we're just going to read it real quick so you can kind of see, because I want you to see what we study about in Genesis. We also see rears its head again in Revelation. It's one big monster story. It's like people go, well, I just read the New Testament. Well, don't. Read the Old Testament too, because it points to end times. So he says this. He says, I will summarize all the ways that Mecca or Saudi Arabia match the scriptural criteria and descriptions of the harlot city in the book of Revelation. 1, it's a literal place. Like, it literally is a place. The last days harlot Babylon is a very real and identifiable geopolitical entity. So are both the city of Mecca and the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So he looks at it like that. It's a desert city. If you look through and you start reading through Revelation, you'll see this city is considered a desert. The harlot city sits specifically in a desert, and of course we know that Mecca, Saudi Arabia obviously match that description. It's also a port or a coastal city. The Bible seems to indicate that the harlot city is a port city, or at least close to the sea, because it does talk a lot about ships and smoke and things like that. Mecca sits 50 miles inland from Jeddah and the emerging King Abdullah Economic City, which are both presently being built specifically to become the world's most technologically advanced and active seaports. These 3 cities form a triangle in relative close proximity to one another and would be linked by a high-speed train system allowing travel from any city to the other in about 30 minutes. Isn't that fascinating? We look and see, she's a consumer, not a producer. Harlot Babylon imports everything. She does not appear to be a great producer in terms of manufacturing or agriculture. So it's like they have oil, but they don't. That's about pretty much it. Let me see. It's also the greatest city of idolatry. Babylon the Great is called the mother of harlots and abominations. She is the greatest source of false religion and idolatry ever known. Because Islam is the world's second largest religion with 1.61 billion Muslims, the city of Mecca is absolutely the unqualified greatest city of idolatry that has ever existed. No other city in human history can compare. Mystery Babylon will be this, a religious capital and missionary center. The last days Babylon is specifically a missionary sending force, spreading her false religion all over the world and holding sway over kings, peoples, and multitudes and nations and tongues. Over the past 40 years, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia has spent well over $100 billion to spread Islam all over the world. No religion's political or national evangelistic or propaganda campaigns in human history has ever come close to equaling this. It's also going to be a city of luxury. We read that in Genesis or Revelation 17, where it's like she was dressed in fine pearls and blah, blah, blah. She's an economic seducer. She'll be a city of slavery. Babylon is the importer of slaves of human lives, the last days Babylon. It says that in Revelation 18:13. Literally 1/3 of the entire population of Saudi Arabia are foreign workers, many of whom are treated worse than slaves. Secular human rights groups report endless stories of poor treatment, abuse, imprisonment, and rape that affect the roughly 9 million foreign workers living in Saudi Arabia. It's a city that murders both Jews and Christians. We know that. You probably don't want to go there anytime soon. Although I actually do want to go there for some weird reason. The scripture states that the harlot is drunk with the blood of saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. In her was found the blood of prophets and all who have been slain on the earth. Saudi Arabia is not the only single greatest financier of the Palestinian intifada and the greatest lobbying power at the UN against the state of Israel, but is also the primary ideological and financial fountainhead of nearly every radical Islamic jihadi organization in the world. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and other jihadist groups that murder Christians are all the fruit of Saudi Arabia's global Wahhabi influence. She represents royalty. She's hidden in plain sight. Isn't it interesting? Like, you don't hear that much about Saudi Arabia, but when you really look at this and you go, wow, they are a powerhouse that we just don't really think much of. The harlot brags in Revelation 18:17, I sit as queen. This is a direct allusion to Isaiah 47, which reflects the attitude of the last days Babylon, who in her wickedness also says, no one sees me. I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. The picture is a city governed by both arrogance and secrecy. Despite all of her abundant sins, she somehow manages to fly under the radar of most. This describes Saudi Arabia nearly perfectly. Even as the Saudi royals have bought nearly every major American politician, they now also control various media outlets. Thus, the Saudis have corrupted the most powerful nation in the world, and they have been brought the nation's silence. He goes on to say the conclusion is having both carefully assessed the prophecy and considered the primary interpretations that have been offered, I believe I have sufficiently demonstrated that Mecca, Saudi Arabia, seems to fulfill all of the scriptural requirements of the harlot Babylon. To be clear, this is not to say that another option, a new city entirely, could not emerge in the future. For now, however, the view that Mecca is the last days Babylon is not only a very legitimate view, but also seems to be the best option. Of course, even if the kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not the ultimate last days Babylon, it is clearly one of the greatest fulfillments in human history and the greatest Babylon of this present time. So, all that to say, I love this because we can take Babylon at the beginning and we can see Babylon at the end, and it fills in all the gaps in the Bible. Now, in both instances, in Genesis and Revelation, in both instances they are godless in the sense that they have walked away from the one true God. They did this in Shinar in Iraq, for the Tower of Babel. They're like, no thanks, I don't want God. And you see this in the end times with them saying, nope, we want a false God. So at this time in Genesis, they're going to build this tower they believe that would reach to heaven. Of course, we know they couldn't do that. It probably means that they were building this tower and then dedicating it to their own false gods. Back then, they worshiped the stars. Astrology actually originated in Babylon. I think this came from Bible.org. It says, the tower may have been designed so that the top contained a representation of the heavens, the signs of the zodiac. On it, astrology replaces submission to the sovereign God with submission to fate, as seen in the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. This is a form of idolatry and is satanic in origin. So, all that to say, if you read your horoscopes, you need to stop it, okay? Astrology is actually a form of witchcraft. You can read it in Deuteronomy 18 or Leviticus 19:31, and you'll see how God feels about things like this. It's not a good thing at all. James Montgomery Boyce says this, the interesting thing about these biblical denunciations of astrology is that astrology is identified with demonism or Satanism in the sense that Satan and his host were actually being worshipped in the guise of the signs of planets. This is the reason for the Bible's stern denunciation of these practices. So, the city, Babylon, was Satan's attempt at a false religion, false worship, and it goes all the way back to Genesis where we see. So they're getting ready to build. Everyone's talking the same language. They're getting ready to build this tower. And then this makes me laugh. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Okay, when I read that, I was like, okay, it's like the Lord thinks it's really funny. Like, oh, look at how cute they are. They think their tower is so tall. Well, guess what? It really isn't. I have to come all the way down from heaven and look at it because you clearly can't see it very far above. So I think it's cute that the Lord has to come down to see that. But when it says the Lord came down, people go, well, who is that? And that could possibly be what's called a Christophany, where some people think like, well, Jesus was just born in Bethlehem and that was it. And that's not true. Like Jesus created everything with, the Father and with the Spirit. So he was always here. And so we actually see what are called Christophanies. He shows up in different places in the Old Testament and doesn't actually say this is Jesus, okay? But when you start seeing like you're on holy ground, you need to bow, like, it's the angel of the Lord, all these things. So when you see that, so most people think that's probably what's going on here. Verse 6 says this, and the Lord said, indeed the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Here's the point. When there's one language, men can work together for good, or they can work together for evil. We had 3 boys right in a row, and I can tell you, those 3 could work for evil really, really easily when the 3 of their little evil minds came up with something. One time, I think I told you this, where we used to live, there was a mountain and had a mine shaft in it, a little mine thing. So it was boarded off, so the kids couldn't go there. But as they got older, they thought it would be fun to like break down the door and go in there. The problem is it's filled with bats. And so they got this really wild idea that they would take their BB gun and they would go in this enclosed place and shoot the bats with the BB guns, okay? Now that's just a stupid idea on every front, okay? But when you get 3 little boys with evil minds, they're going to come up with stupid things, okay? And so that's what happens here. They're all coming together and they're like, hey, let's all get together and come against God because that should be fun, I guess is what they thought. I think in a sense though, and this is weird, but God just wiped everyone off the earth with Noah. So in a sense, it's like God sees it's happening all over again. All these people are getting together and they want nothing to do with God. It's exactly how it was before. And I think this was his plan. Like, we're not going to let them do that again. And so here was his solution. The Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose will be withheld from them. So, come, let us go down there. Confuse their language, and they may not understand one another's speech. Now, there's a reference to the Trinity, so you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. All of them now are going to be at this particular event. But I can imagine what this was like. They're building this big tower. People speak all the same language, and they're working together. And then suddenly the foreman looks to this guy and says, hey, hand me a screwdriver. And the guy goes, no entiendo. I don't understand Spanish. And he's like, hand me a screwdriver. He has no idea what he's talking about. So the foreman's like, what is wrong with you? And so he looks to another guy. And he's like, hey, hand me a screwdriver. He goes, non capisco. Italian. I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, what is wrong with all of you people? You're speaking weird. So he asks the other guy, hand me a screwdriver. And he goes, es fem nakim, Kurdish. And suddenly, these guys can't work together because no one speaks the same language. And they're all confused. They don't even understand. How can you build a tower when no one understands what the foreman is telling you to do? It's kind of brilliant on God's thought process on that. So, because of that, the Lord scattered them abroad, from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad I think I'm tired of talking. Let's try that again. Verse 9, therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, there we go. Now, because of this, there's over 6,900 languages in the world. That doesn't even include other dialects, but there are top 5 languages, and this actually surprised me. Who would you think is the top language in the world? Anyone? What did you say? No, Chinese. Isn't that weird? Chinese. Spanish is second. That makes sense. South America. English is third. Good. Yeah, I didn't know. I was shocked too. 4th is Hindi and 5th is Arabic. I thought this was cute. A man told his doctor he wasn't able to do things around the house anymore. So he went to the doctor and they gave him a physical exam. And he said, now, doc, tell me in plain English, tell me what's wrong with me. The doctor goes, well, in plain English, you're just plain lazy. And he's like, okay, well, can you just give me a medical term for that so I can go tell my wife? It's like, no, that's plain English, okay? But, so now everyone has to scatter. I want you to really think about this. They're all together. This is a mass migration. People were displaced from their homeland. Suddenly they're like, where I used to live, I can't live there anymore because nobody can understand me. But it was through this catastrophe that God would make Jesus' name known. Because we look back and we see this, but then we look forward at Pentecost. Remember when Jesus died on a cross, he rose from the dead, and then there was this moment in Acts where the Holy Spirit shows up, and all these people from all these different countries are there, and they're like, what is happening? Look at Acts 2, verses 1. When the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Suddenly there came a sound from heaven as a rushing mighty wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then there appeared to be divided tongues, let's see if I can maybe change that, as of fire, and one sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. Okay, most of these people who didn't speak the same language. And when this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language. Isn't that fascinating? Like suddenly they could hear everyone else. Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another, look, are not all these who speak Galileans? How is it that we hear each in our own language in which we were born? He goes on to name Parthians and Medes and Elamites, those dwelling in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Egypt, all the parts of Libya. We've talked a lot about those. Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes. Cretians and Arabs. We hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. And the cool part about this is what breaks down our language barrier is Jesus. It just does. We've met Christians in Africa and in China. And you know what's weird? I can't understand them and they can't understand me, but we all know one thing, that we believe in Jesus and we're all followers of him. So that's kind of awesome. We look at this in Revelation 7:9. We see this, after these things I looked and behold a great multitude that no one could number, of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands. It's so amazing that all of this, because there's so many different languages. And somehow we think that because we're American, that only Americans are going to go to heaven because we're the only ones that speak the language of heaven, which probably isn't true. But every nation, every tribe, every tongue, every Chinese, people that place their faith in Jesus, there's something magnificent about that. But the catastrophe that happened in Genesis, God makes something really good out of it here in Revelation 7:9. What leads to this will be with Shem. We will talk about this a little bit next week. Everyone's going to scatter, and what's going to happen, and we'll talk about Abraham a little bit more next week, is that one man will come to the forefront. And it will be from the descendant of Shem, and Abraham will come on the scene, and it will be through his lineage that people all over the world with different tribes and tongues will be able to give their life to him. I don't know. This is the genealogy of Shem. He was 100 years old. He begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And then there's a whole bunch of verses that I don't think I put on. They're just so-and-so had so-and-so and had so-and-so. We'll go down to verse 27. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, which we know as Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. So now we can start, if you know the Bible, you can see, well, Abraham and Lot, there's a lot of things to go, this is them. Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in the Ur of Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarah. The name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarah was barren. She had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, his son Abram's wife, and they went out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. Now remember, we've been talking about Canaan, one of Noah's grandsons, and how they're wicked Canaanites, okay? They were in the land of Israel, so they were going to head down to the land of Canaan, which was Israel. That's where these people lived. And then they came to Haran, and they dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, next week, the journey will begin. Next week, we'll talk about begins this whole journey now with Abraham. He enters the scene. Everything starts now moving towards God's plan to redemption. So here's what we learned today, is this. Sometimes God steps in and disrupts things. We just have to know that. Sometimes God steps in and disrupts our life, but here's what we need to know. The more time we spend reading our Bibles, the more time we spend getting to know this God that overrules and overrides anything in this world, the more peace you actually will have. Because you can start looking at your catastrophes in your life a little bit different. Because when we can see all the catastrophes in history God took, that we look back and we go, wow, he had a purpose for every single one of them. And when we begin to know that, we can start relaxing as followers of Jesus, knowing that everything in the Bible is completely true, and we don't have to worry about the end. We don't have to worry about anything, because we can trust that God knows exactly what he's doing. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for these stories in Genesis that just teach us so much about you. I pray, God, that today we will walk out of here and we will be able to say, wow, God is really big. My God has been too small. And now I realize he's big, he can do anything, change anything, and sometimes he might and sometimes he might not, but it doesn't matter because we trust that he is God. Thank you for Jesus, and that the story always points to him. Thank you for all you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen.